Bon dia, buenos dias, good morning. Unfortunately, that is the only Spanish or Catalan that I can speak. Thank you for the invitation to Scotland to come and join your conference. We very much appreciate it. And yesterday and already today, there's such a lot that I'm learning that I'll take back to Scotland and will continue to develop, because we're very much on a journey in terms of how we regulate care services. So the organisation I work for is called the Care Inspectorate, but we also have an official name under our legislation, which is Social Care, Social Work Inspection Scotland. We were created under a piece of legislation called the Public Services Reform Act, and previously we'd operated as an organisation called the Care Commission. The new legislation from 2010 introduced new powers for us, but also new duties. And the key duty in terms of the direction of travel for my organisation is around our duty to support the improvement of the quality of care for people in Scotland. We were also given a duty to focus on people, so that's about the participation of people in their own care and in the development of care services across Scotland for the first time, and a duty of cooperation with other Scottish organisations and regulators. And below there are listed some of those organisations. I was part of an interesting discussion last night with colleagues about the remit of my organisation. We do not inspect any health services, but we do inspect nursing homes. So care services which are registered with us, but which provide nursing care. The Mental Welfare Commission, which is listed here, has the overall duty in terms of where legislation to protect people's decision-making powers where they've lost capacity is concerned. And Healthcare Improvement Scotland is the regulator that has responsibility for inspection and regulation of all health services in Scotland. We do work with all of these organisations, but to varying degrees. So in terms of the Care Inspectorate, we're a non-departmental public body, which means although we are partially funded by Scottish Government, we're separate, we're objective, and we're in a position to be able to be critical sometimes of some of the policies that come from government when they impact on the quality of care for the people of Scotland. We were founded in 2011 under the new legislation. We've got approximately 615 staff at the moment with a £35 million budget. I thought it might be helpful just to provide a little bit of context to the background of Scotland that we operate within. So in Scotland, we have a devolved parliament, which means that Scottish ministers have some powers to make laws which affect directly Scottish people. However, there are reserved matters that are decided upon by Westminster. And ultimately, the Westminster Parliament retains the power to legislate on all matters, but generally doesn't do so on devolved matters without the consent of Scottish Parliament. And the critical factor here is that health and social care services are devolved to Scottish Government. In terms of our population, I've put some figures up there, just over 5 million people, 19% of whom are over the age of 65, so a similar demographic to other countries, and 17% of our population are under 16, with 64% aged 16 to 64. The increase in the older population has been much more rapidly growing than the younger age groups over the last 20 years, and our largest increase in population group is in people who are over the age of 75. I've promised I'm not going to say anything political because I'm not allowed to, but just wanted to say that Scotland did not vote for us to leave the European Union. And one of the key reasons for that is because Scotland's population increase we see net migration as positive. And our social care and actually our health workforce has a significant amount of European nationals who basically provide our workforce, and we will be faced by additional challenges around recruitment and retention of staff following our exit from the European Union. So that wasn't very political, That's more of a statement of fact, hopefully. So we've now got around 13,500 registered care services across Scotland. The Care Inspectorate regulates all social care across the lifespan. So from nurseries for very young children, through services for adults with learning disabilities, care at home or home care services, social work, social care, criminal justice, children and young people, and services for adults and older people. Those are some of the organisations that we regulate across the bottom there. So we got a new chief executive in January of this year, and he's very keen for us to talk about our purpose and our objectives. So our purpose is across social work, integrated health and social care, early learning and childcare, children's services and criminal justice social work to provide protection and assurance. And that's sometimes a tension for us because we don't have a duty to investigate protection issues. That duty lies with local authorities, with health and social care partnerships. But we do have a duty to ensure that those partnerships are acting appropriately and protecting people. Also, as part of our regulation, we do have a duty of protection, and I'll give an example about how that works sometimes a little bit later. I talked about our new legislation. Well, it's not so new anymore, our 2010 legislation, giving us a duty to support improvement. There's an interesting tension around that for us as well. So we're a regulator, we've got a duty to inspect and scrutinise and therefore criticise, but we also have a part of our organisation, an improvement support team, who carry out specific pieces of improvement work, sometimes across health and social care partnership areas. So they may work with 40 to 60 care service providers to look at improvement projects, but all of our inspectors on a daily basis, when they're working and scrutinising care services, are also supporting improvement by highlighting to providers actually where things are going well and where things could be done better, and directing people to best practice guidance, to making links with other care service providers who are performing well. And what we're trying to do more of is support care service providers to learn from each other, because it's much more effective for people to learn from each other than from the regulator to say, this is why you have to do that, because we say so. We provide information and intelligence to Scottish Government, and that tends to be around clearly the quality of care across Scotland, but also pieces of legislation. We introduced legislation called the Duty of Candour in the last few years, and providers report to us about issues where they've had to make a Duty of Candour declaration. Apologies if I'm stating the obvious, but that's about somebody in a nursing home, for example, the owner of a nursing home admitting they made a mistake which led to the injury or detriment or death of an individual, and there not being an opportunity for litigation by that individual or their family or their representatives on the basis of the Duty of Candour legislation. We also support policy and innovation, so we work closely with Scottish Government and other partners for the development of policy around the social care agenda. So at the moment, we in Scotland are looking at the Safe Staffing Bill, has begun to go through Scottish Parliament. And it's related to what Henk was talking about in terms of what is a safe level of staffing for different types of care service. At the moment, our legislation doesn't direct the providers of care services to make decisions around the dependency of individuals to base their staffing levels on. So we used to provide a staffing schedule which said, in this care home, you will have 4 members of staff on duty at all times, 6 members of staff overnight, for example. We no longer do that. We've removed those staffing schedules, and that's part of a shift to giving responsibility more to providers and taking away the responsibility from the regulator. So vision and strategic outcomes are around world-class social care and social work in Scotland, where everybody in every community experiences high-quality care and support tailored to their rights, needs and wishes. Clearly ambitious, but we're okay with that. We've got 3 strategic outcomes that are all around people. And actually that's new for us. We haven't always had people at the forefront of our objectives or our strategies. Oops. I'm not going to talk too much about this, but this is our current business model. You'll see that people are in the centre. The strategies, plans and programmes down the right-hand side all touch on key parts of our business, our organisation, that impact on the people of Scotland who are using and choosing care services. Of particular interest to me in my role is the inspection plan, which is set by Scottish Government. So at the moment, for every care home, 24-hour care home, for adults or older people or children in Scotland, we currently must inspect that service once a year, so once every 12 months. The degree and intensity to which our inspections carried out is our choice, and we design that based on risk and intelligence that we have about the services, but we will be there, and with care at home, home care, once every 12 months. With other service types, we inspect less frequently. In Scotland, we're very fortunate. I keep calling them new health and social care standards, but they've actually been in place for the last 2 years. So these were written collaboratively. Scottish Government own the standards. We measure quality against the standards as well as against our quality frameworks. But these standards were written with people, by people, with care service providers, with organisations like ourselves and Healthcare Improvement Scotland. And previously we had national care standards, we had 22 sets. There was one for adult placement services, there was one for nurseries, one for care homes for older people. We now have one set of care standards which basically talk about people and people's rights and people's expectations and what people told us that good care should look like. So there are 5 headline outcomes. There are many more standards, but these are the key outcomes. So it's all about how people feel about their care and support and how they experience it. And for the first time, these apply to health. And that's another big shift for us as a country, actually. In terms of the Scottish legislative context, we're currently in the middle of an adult social care reform programme to look at how we can improve, particularly in terms of the ways in which we protect adults who are at risk of harm. We're quite far ahead in terms of between child protection and adult protection, so there's an acknowledgement that we've got some way to go. There's also some interesting work around community empowerment, so a recognition that for people to experience a positive older age, or actually any age, but particularly older age, they need to remain involved and meaningful in their communities. And there are lots of services, particularly in very remote and rural locations throughout Scotland, where it's actually the community partnerships, the communities that work together to support people to remain at home or to be part of the community once they're in a residential care service. So we've been modernising our approach actually since 2014. We've previously been very much of an enforcer. We were compliance focused. If we inspected a care service and they didn't meet one of our regulations, we would insist that they met it. We would use our legal powers to immediately require them to make an improvement. That doesn't work very well, or it didn't for us. So we're moving away from that and looking at how do we enable care services, care providers to recognise where they need to improve, to identify that for themselves and to begin to improve in those areas. A little bit more about that coming. We began to be more proportionate in better performing services. So although we have to inspect 24-hour care services once a year, like I said previously, the intensity to which we inspect those services and regulate them is up to us. So what we've begun to do is say, okay, if a service is consistently performing very well to a very high standard, we aren't receiving complaints about that service, and people are telling us that they're satisfied, why would our inspectors go and spend 3 days, so maybe 48 hours, and regulate that service? It's not necessary. They're already performing well enough. So we've stepped away from that. So we have 2 different inspection types. We've got an intensive, type 1 intensive inspection, and we've got a less intensive inspection, which gives our inspectors much more professional autonomy about the areas that they want to focus on and look at during the regulation. The new framework that I'm going to come on to very quickly, because my time's going quite quickly, has a much greater focus on the outcomes for people, people's experiences. So our inspectors previously would have gone into a care service. They would have maybe started the inspection by looking at paperwork, by checking that safety lists had been completed and environmental checks had been done. And what we started to say to them in 2014 was, well, actually, maybe it's more important for you to find out how people feel about living here, or how people feel about having the care workers come into their home if it's a home care service. So we've given our inspectors explicit permission to walk into a care service under our legislation and to go straight out there and start talking to people who are living in the service, or where people have perhaps can't communicate with us verbally because of loss of cognitive ability. Then we've got an observational tool that our inspectors use called a SOFI 2 tool, which is a short observational framework for inspection, which allows us to establish something about the experiences of people without them having to tell us about that. And that looks at the engagement of staff and the people that you use in the service. I've talked about our role in improvement. We brought in a new complaints handling process, and we're in the process of reviewing our complaints function. So as a regulator, we also have a duty to investigate complaints made against care services by members of the public, professionals, etc. And we've previously been quite an enforcer around that as well. Our new process looks much more at in better performing care services where we've assessed that there's a low risk of actually the complaint going back to the care service for them to investigate, and then they come back to us and say, this is what we did, this is how we did it. We think we've done okay, or not. Critical to our new framework for inspection is an emphasis on self-evaluation. So this is about putting responsibility where it should be with providers, for them to actually identify, along with people who experience care, with families and carers and staff, actually what do we do well and where are the areas we could improve. And we've also begun to strengthen our quality assurance. I am very hopeful that you're all much too busy to have gone onto the Care Inspectorate website and looked at any of our inspection reports, because at the moment I wouldn't be confident that 100% of our inspection reports would tell you what it's like to experience care in any of the care services in Scotland. So some of our inspectors are incredibly skilled at describing what care is like, what it feels like, what it looks like, and others are still on a journey with us to write more outcomes-focused inspection reports. So some information about self-evaluation that I'm going to go through quite quickly. What I did here was I just took a slide that we use with provider organisations and groups where we're reinforcing to them. So we used to ask for self-assessment, and we used to tell providers, it was a 250-page form, and they had to give us certain information. What we're saying now as an organisation is, we actually want you to do this for you. It's for your care service, it's for the people that live in your care service or use it. Don't do it for us, be honest. We're providing support for providers around how to complete a good self-evaluation, but our new framework is based on self-evaluation, so if they use the framework, that also is helpful. And this is some of the, I suppose this is some of the jigsaw puzzle in terms of how we work as an organisation and the other bodies that we work with to establish what the quality of care is in Scotland. Oh, that's a very busy slide. So I've actually mentioned most of these things already. What I haven't mentioned is, the involving people bullet point, which is this third one from the bottom. So we have an involving people group, which is made up of people who use care services and people who choose care services, and also people who have had experience of a family member or a loved one using a care service. Those involved people come out with us on our inspections. So on our strategic inspections of social work and health and social care partnerships, we quite often have young people and older people who use services in different areas to establish what people's experiences are like, or to help to do that. In residential care homes for older people or nursing homes, we have inspection volunteers who will come with us for part of the inspection, who will spend a lot of time speaking with, or actually just being with people who use the service, to help us to get an impression about what people's experiences are like. So this is around us. It's a slide that demonstrates the way in which we're trying to develop the care sector and their view of regulation in Scotland. So we're using this when we're speaking to provider organisations and groups. We're also using this to talk about how we as an organisation are focusing on the outcomes for people, and it's about living. Previously, we would have looked at people are existing, people are surviving, perhaps their healthcare needs are being met, and this is a much more holistic view about actually what's quality of life like. The corporate parenting is mentioned there because as a non-departmental public body, we have a duty with regards to being a corporate parent. So in 2017, we began co-producing a new framework for the inspection of care services for older people. And we did that with people who experience care, with their representatives, with advocacy groups, with care providers across Scotland, and provider organisations like Scottish Care, an umbrella body that represents lots of providers. So we previously would have written our own framework in isolation, and we didn't do that this time. We also piloted it. We changed it on the basis of feedback that we received from people. Overall, it's based on a European framework for quality management approach and self-evaluation. So we have key questions, and underneath those are quality indicators. So this is the framework that we used for our quality indicators. And for me, the critical point about these is the first one. It's first for a reason, because it's the most important. How good are the outcomes for people experiencing care? And this is the feedback from our inspectors is that this was the outcome that gave them explicit permission to go and actually focus on this first. Feedback from people using care services was, your inspectors used to walk into this building, walk past me, go into an office, look at some folders, and maybe speak to me, perhaps. People are now telling us, actually, your inspector was interested in how my life is living here. So for us, that's a real positive. We made changes to our evaluation or grading scale at the same time. So you can see our scale goes from 1, which is unacceptable, unsatisfactory. We're likely to be using our legal powers to take enforcement action, to 6, which is excellent. Previously, with the grade 3, adequate, which is in the middle there, some care services might have continued to be adequate inspection after inspection for 5, 10, 15 years. Our new That points to the wrong grade. It should point to number 3. But our new grading criteria basically clarifies a grade of adequate is not good enough. It is not okay for any of us to say that people should live in what's only an adequate service. So some of the tensions around that are that we have a code of practice, the Scottish Strategic Regulators Code of Practice, which says that we must take into account the viability of business when making decisions about the quality of care. So some providers could challenge our decisions on the basis that it will impact on their profitability. However, adult support and protection legislation always precedes the regulator's code of practice. So one of the examples of where that's been useful recently is I spent last Friday in a sheriff court in Inverness because we inspected a care home where people weren't actually receiving meals, where people were being injured by staff who just were poorly trained, hadn't been inducted effectively, and actually weren't in a position to be able to provide care for them, and where critically there weren't enough staff to meet the needs of the people that were using the care service. So and there were significant adult protection issues that were happening as a result of that. So while our code of practice says we've got to consider the profitability of the provider, the legislation that we work under said we had the right to take an application to a sheriff and ask him or her to consider allowing us to close a care home, which we successfully did on Friday. We're not always successful, and we've only done that 8 times in the last 17 years, so it's not something that happens a lot. But I think for us as an organisation and for the Scottish public, it's encouraging to know that where we do need to, we can be proportionate, but where we need to act to protect people, we will. Okay, I'm minus 14 seconds, so muchas gracias, moltas gracias, and thank you.